A nonprofit organization called the White Coat Waste Project has found that a lab in Tunesia tortured and killed dozens of dogs after infecting them with disease-causing parasites. This research was funded by Dr. Anthony Fauci's NIH, which sent a $375,000 grant to the lab. According to the nonprofit, the money went to, quote, drugging beagles and locking their heads in mesh cages filled with hungry sandflies so that the insects could eat them alive. Joining me now is the founder and president of the White Coat Waste Project, Anthony Elatti. Anthony, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having us on. Appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, there's a lot I want to ask you here, and I talked about this in your group's findings on my radio show earlier this week, and I can tell you we had people from all over the United States calling in who are absolutely furious about this. As you know, Americans love their dogs. In your findings, I mean, I never even got to see what was the supposed rationale that this lab had for torturing dogs slowly to death and removing their vocal cords so that their screams, so to speak, could not be heard.
Yeah, it's NIH has some explaining to do on a lot of things right now. There's been a lot of confusion in the media and in the stories going around about these truly horrific findings that you're talking about that have united the country. The White Coat Waste Project launched the Beagle Gate campaign and investigation. And what we found is it's not one lab in Tunisia. It's not two labs. It's not three labs. We've confirmed 4 separate and distinct labs funded by Fauci's NIAID for the Beagle experiments. We've been on this trail for a number of years. The first one we found was actually in his own intramural NIAID office, right in their own basement. They were doing these experiments with no pain relief and no anesthesia. Okay, that was the first one. The second one, and that was sandfly. He was doing sandfly biting experiments in his own Maryland NIH lab. Number one. Number two, they did the same thing they were doing there with the sandflies, and then they outsourced it to Georgia. Okay, that's the second Beagle Gate lab, taxpayer funded. All of it. The third example, in which the NIAID funded the lab in Tunesia. Okay, another variation on a theme. The fourth one is the infamous debarking, cutting the vocal cords out, which is in California. They call it Beagle Gate for a reason. It's a widespread pattern of abuse because 50 cents on the dollar of Fauci's budget goes for animal experimentation. That's nearly $3 billion a year he's funding on these kinds of experiments. It's horrific. It's wasteful. It's wrong. And it's uniting everybody against it.
What were these experiments supposed to find out? I mean, usually you see something like this, animal testing, they'd say, okay, well, before we give a vaccine to humans, we might try it on a chimpanzee and see what the reaction is. What were they doing with sand fleas, beagles? Yeah. It just seems beyond belief that something so cruel could be underway. Was there some lofty justification from these bureaucrats for this?
You know, each one of them the answer is no. There is no lofty. I mean, there is no good justification for it. Lofty, veneer, sure. It's government. When have we ever met a government agency that doesn't like to spend money and then say, well, we need more research. Let's do it again. And let's do it again. And another variation on a theme. Endless experimentation to know, grants that go on forever, that kind of thing. It's wasteful spending. What's going on at the NIH and Fauci's NIAID is no different than any government bureaucracy that has a spending problem. Dr. Fauci has a wasteful spending problem. And to answer your specific question, though, look, each one of those four separate and distinct Beagle Gate labs, they're all a little bit different. The sandfly experiments, for example, where they gnaw at the beagle's ears, eating them, feeding on them. They're investigating a nasty parasitic disease that has very severe real world consequences for some folks especially in third world. But for example, he was doing it in his own lab. He was doing it in his own lab with no anesthesia or pain relief. He was doing it at taxpayer expense. When he was finished with that, then they outsourced it to Georgia to do it again. Okay. Georgia, the Georgia lab, the second example, they say that Fauci specifically, the NIAID specifically, demanded dogs, right? So not even some other animals, but dogs. So when he outsourced it to Georgia, the Georgia guys said, well, Fauci's people said we wanted dogs.